I began excavating the ruins of Kandar with a group of my colleagues.
Talk to me.
My time to go to sleep.
Surprise! It's a Halloween Horror Nights vlog. And I say surprise because I didn't even know I was going until like midway through today. So with my annual pass, I get a free night of HHN. What I did not realize was it was limited to specific nights. And after tonight, the only other time I'd be able to go would be early November, and even that would be kind of hard coming off of a bunch of other stuff that's going on and going into a bunch of other stuff that's going on. So I decided to be dumb, I don't know, probably, and I'm heading out there on a Wednesday night. On the plus side is, even if I don't get into a lot of stuff, going in doesn't cost me anything. I would basically lose it if I don't go tonight. Parking should be free. So really the only thing I'm spending money on is gas to get down there, and then food or whatever. Any souvenirs, I guess. It's open until 2 a.m. tonight. Unless stupid amounts of traffic hit, I should get there around 7 o'clock. So it shouldn't have been open too long by the time I get there. And yeah, we will see how this goes. I'm fully prepared to not get on everything. There were no express passes available tonight. I don't know if that's just there's none available for reasons, or if it's sold out for express and it's going to be a madhouse. But it's also supposed to storm tonight, so I don't even know how much I'll see of scare zones and other things like that. As I kind of mentioned in my last video, I am way behind on getting these Halloween videos out. As I'm sitting here filming this, I'm talking about Halloween Horror Nights 5 days before Christmas. And it'll probably be even closer by the time I actually get this uploaded online. And while I really easily could have just not done this video and just skipped it because it took so long to come out, I personally like having these Halloween vlogs, and very specifically the Halloween Horror Nights episodes, to look back on. I just think they're kind of cool to see how the event progresses and how things go from year to year. So if nothing else, I'm really just making this for myself. So typically for Halloween Horror Nights, I like to arrive nice and early, be ready to go as soon as the park opens for the night. But since I was kind of doing this last minute, I was definitely running a bit behind schedule. But I still ended up getting there just a little after 7 o'clock. And upon entering the park, I was brought into my first scare zone, Dr. Oddfellow's collection of horror. And I'm going to mess up this character's name over and over. He was like the icon of the event this time. But I watched way too many of Stitched Together Productions, Andy the Maniacal Cinephiles videos, so I always keep wanting to call him Dr. Oddcoitus.
Ahoy, ahoy, my good boy.
Don't ahoy hoy me, Dr. Oddcoitus. Listen up. In the asylum, did you ever diddle my feet?
Well, in the field, it's common practice.
What?
Whoops, you're breaking up.
Oh,
Gotta
no,
go.
don't you hang up.
Take care.
You get back here.
Would have been a better name. Much funnier. But yeah, normally I skip this first scare zone. This first scare zone is usually kind of like the summary scare zone or the icon scare zone of the night. And I usually leave it to the end because it's kind of on that main street walking into Universal, and I typically go to the right immediately. But I think because they built that stupid new Minions land, the entire area was moved up much closer to the entrance. So you really did have to go through it right upon entering the park, unless you kind of took that loop around through the bathrooms or whatever, which I think might have been under construction. So that might not have even been an option. I don't remember. But as they've done years past, they had kind of the trellis with Halloween Horror Nights written across the top of it. They had projections on the ground showing these kind of runic symbols, which are, I guess, an element with Dr. Oddfellow's whole backstory and persona and stuff. The scare actors at the beginning were kind of these kind of weird ghoul characters. I can't really say exactly what they were supposed to be, but just kind of like misshapen monsters. There were also a fair bit of clowns roaming around throughout. When I arrived, it was raining, so a lot of the stuff that was going to take place on these small stages they have set up throughout the scare zones were not going on at the time. So there was kind of a fortune teller's wagon looking very old school Universal monsters like Bela the Gypsy and all that. Sitting there, had a bunch of stuff in the back, and it had like a stage coming coming out the front of it, and I assumed the actor playing Dr. Oddfellow was supposed to go up there and do something to interact with the crowd. I believe one of the themes this year was that every scare zone would have a version of Dr. Oddfellow in it, so you're supposed to be looking out for him at all times. I only caught him like once or twice looking through stuff, but this seems like it would have been the area where he would have been in his main scare zone. Beyond that, the theming was some like large kind of wardrobe crates, like old-timey wardrobe crates full of random creepy stuff that he had or whatever, which I guess is his collection of horror. The next scare zone, which usually the path I take would have been the first scare zone, but like I said, the first one was moved this year, was Dark Zodiac. This is one that I had gotten a decent look at during the day when going to Universal, not for Halloween Horror Nights. There are a lot of various little stages with Zodiac-themed setups going on, looking almost like they were supposed to be torture devices or whatever. During the day, they cover up any like dead bodies, but at the event, you could see there were actual like prop mannequins on there looking like they were being killed. The majority of the scare actors were wearing very dark clothing, a lot of them wearing various kinds of robes with like sigils and things on them, continuing that theme over. There were several people dressed in all black with a mask on that had like very spikes, which I think was a Spirit Halloween mask, but those were roaming around with chainsaws revving, which always gotta have the chainsaws, right? Again, still early in the night when it was still wet out, nobody was on these stages, but when I came back later in the evening, there were actors up on these stages. Unfortunately, when I came back later in the evening, I was in a bit of a rush, so I didn't get to enjoy this area quite as much as I would have liked to and to really take in what was going on. I will say, in the dark, everything looked a lot cooler. In the daytime, it's like, okay, they're in robes, but it's bright out, so it's not that scary. But seeing them at night with the controlled lighting and more of the fog and atmosphere and being up on different levels and things really did exemplify this area. I did also notice more at night some of the scare actor costumes were based off of different Zodiac signs. Kind of hard to tell what's a Cancer, what's a Scorpio, if you can't really tell if there's a tail or not sometimes, but it seemed like there were some kind of, things with claws and multiple legs walking around. It's more like, normal human clothes, but with like appendages built out of it or whatever, but that was kind of cool. And I don't think I got it on film, but I think this was the scare zone when I was walking out of it. A scare actor like rammed into the side of me really hard by accident. I think their mask or whatever, they couldn't see to the sides of them, and I was too busy looking at my damn camera, and we just kind of like collided side to side, which it's kind of funny because I feel like that would happen a lot more often for the many times I go to Halloween Horror Nights, and I think that's the first time I've ever actually run into a scare actor. Taking my typical path around the park, I ended up going into a third scare zone before I ever hit any houses. So the third scare zone is Jungle of Doom. This is another one I'd seen during the day, and I really like the theming of it. It's a lot of big, like, cracking walls and vines and things, like an old temple in the middle of a jungle. However, at night, they were pumping in fog. I don't know if it was because of the humidity with the rain and everything, or other environmental factors going on within this scare zone, but the fog would come out super thick and just create walls where you couldn't see for a pretty long stretch of time, and I was just trying not to run into somebody there. So because of that, I really, in either passing during the day or at night, didn't get a great look at what was going on with the scare actors. actors because it was just hard to see in general. There were like little huts set up that have monsters coming out of them. There's a voiceover from Dr. Oddcoitus talking about how he was creating new life out of the jungle with his powers or whatever. So I think some of these things are supposed to be animal-human hybrids, some are supposed to be like plant-human hybrids. I actually do remember there was a really cool looking bird costume. It's kind of like a tropical bird-human hybrid, but it was all kind of messed up looking. This is the one scare zone that I did catch the doctor walking around in. I guess the like modern version of him, he has like a cane with like a glowing green topper on it. And I think this is supposed to be like the prototype version of it. I think he even says something like this is where it began or something like that. And he has just like a stone or something in his hand that's also glowing green. But all I could think of was the fucking aggro crag from Nickelodeon Guts. Throughout the thing was various bits, like I said, the temple, there was a crashed plane, there were bats hanging above you, which I couldn't see at night, but I knew were there from the daytime. There's various stuff, like a plane had crashed and like various like stuff you would take on an old school safari were kind of scattered around. There's a little campsite off to the side where they were like roasting rats over a fire. When I did go back at night, like I said, the fog was still thick, so it was still really hard to see. And this area always has dim lighting. For whatever reason, the lighting's always dimmer in this one particular scare zone. And that was kind of a bummer because seeing some of the costumes during the day was actually really impressive, and then at night a lot of them were so much in the dark and shadows that I felt like I couldn't really appreciate what was going on with all that work. It did seem, however, at night that there were more actors out. This could also be because of the rain and it drying out and they brought in more actors.
It is said that those who harness the power of the soul possess the ability to create a new life. Here is where my search for power and immortality begins. The twisting of nature and beast is but a first step towards becoming the most powerful being in this universe and beyond.
Yeah, you turn for that.
So finally I made it to my first house, Universal Monsters Unmasked. And after sitting in line for a little while, I went ahead and tried to find the express pass again. When I tried before I left home, they were not available for whatever reason. But when I got to the park, I was actually able to buy express. So I waited in the line a fair bit before I bought the express, and I wasn't really sure if I could just sneak over to the express line or what I needed to do. So I kind of just sat in the normal line for this one house. And while my initial idea was, I was like, oh, I'll just go back another day and whatever, do whatever I didn't get done. I'm really glad that I didn't do that. I did end up buying express because I honestly really didn't have time the rest of the month to do that. So it's probably for the best that I just got it all knocked out in one night like I usually do. So this one is in some of the large like parade float buildings. So there's not really a whole lot going on outside. They usually just project something up on the side of the building. But when you walk in, you're in this set that looks like a big outdoor setting where you're going under a bridge in the streets of Paris after dark. There's a cop up above you on the bridge itself, like telling you to go back to your homes. There's a killer on the loose. But as you walk under the bridge, you're led into like the tunnels, and the Phantom of the Opera is there attacking you. In this version, the Phantom, I guess, is killing people, skinning their faces, and then wearing them like Leatherface. Just an interesting update on the whole mask idea with him. A big trend they had this year was using projections. I know they've used them in the past, but I feel like every house this year had some kind of projection being used to help tell the story. Here they had a scene, the iconic mask removal scene with the Phantom, shown in silhouette on the wall, like you were seeing the shadow of it from the other side of the room. You kind of continue through the Paris catacombs and everything, and I guess you end up in the basement of the Opera House. It looks like there are barrels set to explode. And then you go into the Opera House itself. You're going past like various like booths or whatever, like the fancy boots at the top of the opera. I don't know what you call those, but there's like dead bodies there, and the Phantom will pop out with a knife. And I guess because he's a silent character, every time he pops up, you hear the knife, like metallic sound of the knife being pulled, and then there's like a operatic like sting played to kind of indicate, oh, the Phantom's here. After you kind of move out of that, there is the first sighting of the Invisible Man, and then you also hear like a news cry or whatever talking about people being strangled to death by an invisible killer. You then go into a room that uses kind of a favorite effect that they've done in the past, where there are a lot of mannequins that look like the Invisible Man in various states of bandages. It's kind of a dark room. I think some black light or neon going on. And then, of course, one of them is a scare actor that jumps out at you. Then you're out on the streets of Paris, and this thing comes running at you from behind a corner. I realized after thinking about it for a minute, thinking about what the theme of the house was, that this was Mr. Hyde. They really made the design a little too monstrous, a little too werewolfy for my tastes. I get that Mr. Hyde and a lot of its screen portrayals is not a particularly frightening look. I mean, it's like a kind of messed up person, and I mean some of those old movies probably are a little bit racist in their portrayal of Mr. Hyde, if you're going to be perfectly honest about it. So it kind of made sense, I guess. You're trying to modernize it to make it a little more monstrous, but it just wasn't something I initially recognized as Mr. Hyde. Then you go into kind of an interior scene where you see Mr. Hyde like ripping somebody's spine out on a table. I think it's supposed to be like a bar or something where he's murdering people. And then as you go past behind a wall, somebody runs out. I think it was supposed to be Dr. Jekyll, like he transformed back and was like running out like, it's not my fault or whatever, but I wasn't entirely sure because I never really heard what he said. And then I watched videos going back to refresh my memory on these houses. I couldn't tell in those videos what he was saying, so I think that's what was going on there. Then you find yourself walking up to the Notre Dame Cathedral, and Quasimodo is up high above you, and he's on a bungee cord, so he'll kind of like drop down over the audience, over the crowds, before kind of going back up. I caught this at the wrong time going through, and I was like right below him when he started to drop, and it kind of looked like he was trying to hang himself, so I was very confused what was going on with that scene. But immediately after, you're now inside the church and you're seeing more of him, so clearly he wasn't killing himself. And then it kind of ends with Quasimodo, but then there is one last room where they bring back the other three monsters kind of all in a row to kind of give you the full experience of everything before you exit. I really like this house. I jumped a lot at things. I'm not sure if it was because it was particularly scary or because I chugged a Red Bull like 5 minutes before going into the park and I was just like amped up on caffeine, but I definitely jumped quite a few times. Next up was The Last of Us. This was also another one of those parade float buildings or whatever.
To all veteran soldiers, come out from the shadows. Surrender. You will stand trial for your crimes. We will give you more dignity than you've ever given us. But if we have to go building to building and hunt you down like the rest you are, at that point you will find us without mercy. One way or another, it is only a matter of time before you have to face justice for what you have done.
They built a much larger walkway around it this time than I remember them having in the past. So it just felt like a sea of line out in front of this building. It's funny for me as someone who loves horror movies that I never really got into horror video games, particularly survival horror. I just don't care for them. Leading up to going to Halloween Horror Nights, I did actually just watch a playthrough of The Last of Us to familiarize myself with the property before going into the house. So the environments within this kind of felt pretty standard for what you see at a lot of Halloween Horror Nights things. Like you'd be inside in kind of industrial burned out buildings or broken down buildings, then outside through like alleyways and stuff, then back into buildings. I can't tell you where I've seen these sets before, but I feel like they probably did reuse elements of sets they've had in the past. Of course, they did have all the like Firefly graffiti on it and like Fedra posters and stuff all around, which did help. I always assume doing houses like this is a pain in the butt because you have to find actors who are going to look like the characters from the game, especially when one of them is supposed to be a young girl. You have to make sure you find enough tiny actresses to play that role. The infected within here looked pretty good. As you go in the beginning of the house, they're a lot less crazy. Like they have a little bit of stuff coming off of them, and like it's really usually a mask. Even though looking at videos, you could really tell it's a mask, but in person it felt pretty convincing. But they didn't have a lot of like makeup going on in their arms or anything. And then you got deeper, there were sections where they were like simulated like spores, I think with projections. There were the mushrooms and everything all over the walls, the fungus. And then you'd have more of the like true clickers where they had the whole head coming up with weird stuff and their arms were all painted up and everything. They looked more disheveled. And then as you went deeper in, you also got some of the, I think they're the bloaters, the really big ones. I think they did a great job bringing those to life. You know, for a haunted house, like that's something that would be a really crazy costume to build, and I think they pulled off 2 of them in there, and they looked really good. They really stole the show for me, honestly, with this thing. I feel like the house really captured like the kind of feel of the game, the basic like, you know, level section, but it didn't really capture any specific piece of the story, which I guess maybe makes sense, but I was wishing there was a little more of a narrative through line going throughout the house. It was definitely fun, and I feel like some of the scare actors got way closer to me than happens with like 90% of houses I've ever been in, so that was a bit more intense. The next house was The Darkest Deal. This was the first house I went to out in the what they call the sprung tents. These are always cool because they usually have some kind of facade on the outside before you even go into the house. And this was the outside of a place called Bub's Lounge. Bub, get it? Beelzebub, I guess. But yeah, it's supposed to be like an old like music club. This whole concept behind this house is something I really like that they touched on. It's the old like blues legend of selling your soul to the devil at the crossroads for musical fame or whatever. So as you walk in, you're kind of like walking through this narrow aisle with like cornfields on the side of you, and you see the main character whose name I don't remember making a deal with the devil for blues fame. There's actually a cool effect, like the devil holds up the contract and you see his name like appear in lights on the thing. I assume those were the projection or something, but it was a really cool effect. And kind of immediately you start seeing other demons popping out of random places. This really didn't feel like it contributed to the story much, but I think it was just something to add jump scares in while they went through the main plot of the thing. So next you're inside Bub's Lounge itself and you see him up on stage playing. There's more demons jumping out at you from around the club, but as he's playing to the audience, you do see the shadow behind him on the wall is of the devil or a demon. You then go into kind of like a cemetery section. There's these projections of like glowing green energy coming off the tombstones and everything, like flowing through. And in there are these other musicians kind of talking about how they made that same deal. So they're infected by the same curse and sold their souls. You then kind of go out into like a street scene. I assume it's supposed to be like New Orleans or something like that. And kind of this rundown old-timey streets. There's more jump scares. And then you go into a blues club. So we see our protagonist. He's playing on stage. The devil comes up, tells him his time's due. He does his best Shang Tsung impression. Your soul is mine. You see like a glowing effect, I think, on the actor's chest as his soul is removed. And that's how he meets his fate. There's more demons in the club, of course. And then you go into what I assume is hell. It's all like fire and burning around you and stuff. There's more demons popping up. You see the blues musician up like trapped in the wall, kind of very Dante's Inferno style punishment. And that's pretty much the end. I feel like I missed a lot of the scares walking through this one, so watching a playback video of it, I kind of feel like I caught more than I did when I went in person. And looking back at my notes, which my notes were literally me texting my friend about what was going on for the first few houses, I did make a mention that they were using smells more than they have in previous years. I have to assume this was one of the houses where they did it, because there definitely was a good chance for having like burning stuff and all that kind of stuff going on. So I don't remember specifically what those were, but I feel like they kind of toned those down a little bit during like the COVID years, and then now they're starting to bring them back a lot more. The next house, also one of the sprung tents, was Dr. Oddfellow Twisted Origin. So this was supposed to be like the story behind the icon for this year's events. The outside facade was of like a circus tent, and of course I am immediately having Hallow Scream flashbacks. And when you go in, it is a lot of clowns. Like a lot of clowns. Like 90% of the things jumping out at you in this house are clowns. So you're kind of walking through like this thing, and it's just a bunch of random clowns popping out at you. You then see the doctor up on stage talking about how he's made human-animal hybrids, which I guess kind of ties into the jungle thing. Which I thought the jungle thing was supposed to be his origin, but this is his origin. I'm confused. You then go into like a makeup room, and I was thinking, again, Hallow Scream had this kind of exact same scene, but instead of doing cool stuff with the mirrors here, it was clowns popping out of wardrobe sections in between the mirrors. I think there was also some like static figures that were looking in the mirrors and their heads would like turn at you or whatever. It was okay, but not nearly as creepy as the way Hallow Scream set theirs up. We then get another scene of the doctor up on like a stage or whatever doing Your Soul Is Mine. Do we really need like 2 Shang Tsung moves in 2 houses that were side by side with 2 different characters? That was kind of an odd choice. Next up, you're going through like animal cage areas, kind of like, you know, the train cars, old-timey ones with animals behind bars. They reused a puppet they've used in the past. Now it's a lion, but in the past it's been an American Werewolf in London, it's been a Chupacabra, I think it was the werewolves in Trick or Treat, but now, like I said, dressed as a lion coming out at you from the cages. Then you get attacked by what I assume is one of these animal hybrids they talked about, but it really looked like a person wearing a mascot head of like a bull, so I'm not sure if it's supposed to be an actual hybrid or if it was just a badly done effect. Then you go into like what I assume is supposed to be a magic show section. Somebody's running around with like a severed head. There's another person in the middle of a stage trying to cram a body into a trunk. You then go into an area that's marked as the shooting gallery, but all you really see is like knife throwing stuff, like the old, carnival thing where somebody would be up against a thing, you throw knives around them. But of course the bodies have been hit with the knives and they're dead. There's another scene with the doctor up on stage. I think it's supposed to be that wagon that was out in the first scare zone, like you're inside of it, going long ways, walking towards him. He's basically like, oh, I've collected your souls, now kill them, my minions, or whatever. But like, if he has your soul, does he really need you dead? And I believe there was supposed to be a scene, I think I saw a projection that maybe it was supposed to be like the death of Jack the Clown, because I think that's the backstory, is like Dr. Oddfellow's the one that killed Jack, and then Jack came back and was all like crazy, or crazier. But I wish I would have made it more explicit. I kind of wish I would have just had an actor in a Jack costume and like really played it up more. Maybe a more human version of Jack. That would have been kind of cool. But I really don't feel like they really showed us much origins of anything in this. It was just him already doing stuff. And if you can't tell, I'm like really not impressed with this house. I don't care about the Dr. Oddfellow character to begin with. And then like after Halloween Scream did their carnival house that I thought was really cool, this one just felt really lackluster. I think it would have been lackluster on its own, but in comparison, it becomes even worse. Next up, not a house or a scare zone, but the Diagon Alley section of London. This is an area where they don't normally theme anything, but usually is open for the ride back there, and the shops and everything. But I'd heard this year they were bringing in some of like the evil wizards to like walk around that area to make it like a pseudo scare zone. When I first walked in, the streets were like super crowded. The dragon, I guess, was about to breathe fire, so like the crowd was just really packed in there waiting for that. And then I kind of looked around trying to figure out where these actors were, and eventually they were kind of in the back side area of the alley that's like really tucked away and not where you normally go unless you're going to the shops or looking for the stage show back there. And honestly, I think Harry Potter fans are just a little bit too committed because they were just all just standing there watching in big crowds, and it didn't feel like a scare zone where there was a flow to it. It just felt like a bunch of static people walking and these actors trying to weave in and out of people and do something, but it was really kind of very static and bland feeling because it was so packed in there. Honestly, I think if they do this again, I think it was a cool idea. It's something I've always wanted to see them do something with the London section of the park, but maybe they do it out in the main London streets. While it's not as wizarding themed out there, I think it would at least give more of a flow, let it feel more like a scare zone, and kind of avoid this kind of just cluster of people that they had in this. The next scare zone is in the San Francisco section of the park, and this is Shipyard 32, 32 being Halloween Horror Nights 32. And this was like the doctor was bringing in different monsters from all over the place. So there were a lot of like crates, some of them were broken open, some of them were like normal. There's like a crane moving the crate, or not really actually moving the crates, but it looked like it was there to move the crates. There's a big like armored truck with like chains and bars in the back. It also looked like it was supposed to be delivering stuff, and it had like Oddfellow's name on the side of it. I think I saw some people in there that were supposed to be like human victims of the monsters, and then there were just a bunch of random monsters within. There was like a cage at one point where there was almost looked like a fairy kind of character trying to break out. I remember seeing one of the crates was labeled like Tooth Fairy, so maybe that was a reference to last year or last couple years or whatever it was. 2020, 2021 probably, I think. And then, among the various monsters, a couple stood out. There's like a Nosferatu style character that looked really cool. And there was this bat creature that was kind of like an albino bat-human hybrid, which I really liked the look of that thing. It looked really cool. It had wings that flapped and everything. It was just kind of a nice character design. It's a bit of a random one, but this is an area that usually gets really bottlenecked within the scare zones. And I think they kept it a little more simplified, let things flow a little better, and I think it worked out pretty well. Next up in the Fast and the Furious queue area was the Chucky Ultimate Kill Count house. Walking through the queue, they use the TVs that I think are there normally. I've never actually been on that ride. I've only been in that area for Halloween Horror Nights. But it's playing a video, and basically the premise is that this house was a HHN house, like HHN for real, just a normal haunted house attraction. And then the real Chucky finds out about it, is offended that nobody's actually dying in the house. So he goes to possess all the dolls they're using to make the haunted house and kill everybody.
I'm here for the horror that is Halloween Horror Nights. Did you know that those assholes at Universal Studios don't actually kill anyone that they're dead? Are you fucking serious? When do we get to start standing? I'm with the NVP Studio. I took over this haunted house
So when you first walk in, there's like a full like Chucky puppet beckoning you in, and then you start seeing various kills throughout both the movies and the series. Like you walk in, there is the eyeball stabbing thing from part 2. There's a photocopier kill, which I think was part 1. You see the bathtub with a character that's probably Jennifer Tilly, but for likeness rights isn't Jennifer Tilly, being electrocuted. As you go through, you start seeing Chucky either killing people or attacking you. A lot of them are just like probably Tots dolls or something, just being mildly puppeteered. Like there's not really a whole lot of action. They're just kind of being moved a little bit, or they're posed in a way, and then there's an actor like in front of them or whatever, acting like they're being stabbed. So you go through this whole thing, various scenes of Chucky, and then it looks like you're exiting. There's like a bunch of like Chucky merch up on the wall, almost like you're exiting through the gift shop. Then you're out in this alley section, which I'd forgotten about. I guess it's part of the flow of this area back here, and it's also included in these houses. Like when they did Blumhouse in the past, this was a division between the two houses. But here there is like an actor screaming, like basically showing you're still in the house. I want to say, I did not find it in the videos I watched back, but I want to say there was a like large Chucky mascot, like a larger than life, larger than, you know, adult human mascot of Chucky that attacks you here. And then you're back in. There is like a wall of good guy doll boxes, and Chucky jumps out of there to attack you. There's a few scenes where like actors are like, you know, they have like a rag doll Chucky attached to them, so they're acting like they're being stabbed or attacked or whatever, just kind of flinging around this ragdoll puppet on them, looking like Chucky's grabbed onto them. We see the Christmas scene from the TV show where there's like a body chainsawed in half. There was a room with like weird static Chucky props of different like injured or death scenes of him. So there was like the melted one from the TV show. There was like the full melted one from the end of part 2. There was the head from Cults. And there were a couple other ones that just looked really weird. Going through, you do see like the TV show version of Andy where he's been captured, so he's got like the full beard and just looks like a hobo like running around. I think you also do see the human form of Glenn Glenda. You go into the church from season 2 and you see like the body punched through in the chest, and you see like another like cut in half body. You get kind of another TV screen with Chucky and like a running kill count going through, I guess like how many people he's killed in the haunted house. And I wish this had been more of a theme throughout. I think in the LA version it was kind of more throughout. You'd see like updated kill counts as you went. I wish they played more off of that as you went through this. You get a few more random like Chucky attack scenes before the end of it. I really love this house going through it. I thought it was great. I mean, I'm a Chucky fan, so I really did enjoy seeing it all brought to life. But then I went and watched the videos of the LA one and saw how many full articulated puppets and things they used, and I got really jealous. So this was great, but the LA one looked amazing. The next scare zone was Vamp 69. Make a lot of jokes about that one. But this was continuing their Vamp series. They'd done one in the 80s, one in the 50s, and now we are at like the Summer of Love rock music festival thing going on. So there are hippies, and there are like biker gang people, and vampires throughout them. So you have like hippie victims walking around, and then some hippies and some biker like vampires attacking people. There's like a vampire Jimi Hendrix. You walk through, there's various like 60s style vehicles, like a bug and a bus. See like a kind of more severe looking car from the biker gang. Bus, you see projections on the inside of people fighting vampires inside of the bus. There's some motorcycles around. Those are some boots, which I assume are supposed to be like merch boots at the show or whatever. And it has like various scenes of like death and decay going on there. Then there is a stage with the band playing. I think they had like some like body parts mixed in with the instruments and stuff like that. By this time it was dry enough, they were doing stuff on the stage, but they weren't like in the middle of the performance when I went up, so I only got like a little bit of a glimpse of what was going on. The next house, and the first in the series of soundstage ones for me, was Dueling Dragons. This was based on the old ride at Islands of Adventure that later became a Harry Potter ride and then got demolished for that Hagrid's thing. So this was a dueling coaster. One side was supposed to be a fire dragon, one side was supposed to be an ice dragon, and you'd kind of like run at each other and all this stuff with a dueling coaster. So the story of this is like the wizards behind these dragons or whatever are battling and you're kind of caught in the middle. So you walk in and there's this big like tree with like a Castle Grayskull face on it that you walk underneath and you start getting attacked. Then there's some kind of just generic troll monsters, but then you start seeing the fire and ice monsters. So the ice ones are like icicles coming off of them and like a blue glowing chest. The fire ones have like a flame effect going on their armor, which is really cool looking. And the thing I loved about this house is that they used a lot of different lighting effects, both on the walls and things in the characters' hands and on their costumes, to really sell that they're using magic to fight back and forth. Something I wouldn't think would be easy to do in a practical haunted house, but for the limitations that come with that, they pulled it off beautifully in this thing and just had some really fun, great effects going throughout. Eventually you cross over like a drawbridge going into a castle. And as you go through the castle, there's like more fire and ice creatures kind of battling across the way. So like you're in the middle, there'd be a character on one side, character on the other, just kind of popping out at random points. The castle facade inside has a lot of like stained glass and stone, obviously. And then you go into like a burning section of the castle. So like the walls are lit, like the stone's almost molten going through certain parts of it. You see the orange dragon's claw kind of reaching out at you. A lot more fire creatures popping up throughout. And then you move into the ice section of the castle. So now there's more ice creatures. The walls look like they're kind of frozen and all that stuff. Then you kind of go out into the castle courtyard. There are two different kind of characters, fire and ice fighting. I don't know if these are supposed to be the wizards or if they're just like almost like knight kind of characters fighting one another. But that's really cool. And again, a cross action thing while you're walking through the middle. I remember like you see more of the castle ahead of you and there's like one of the dragons up on top of it, the fire dragon, I think. I don't remember if the ice dragon ever made a full appearance. Like you saw the fire dragon's claw in the one part, now you're seeing like the full body of it. I really wish I remembered if the ice one ever really showed up in physical form. But then you go into a section that says, choose thy fate. This is a reference to the ride where you would choose to go fire or ice side of the ride. So I think I chose the ice path. I think it's supposed to be one of those things where like, depending on the time you go and who's acting or whatever, like one side's a winner, one side's a loser. I never saw anything to indicate that, but really it just brought me to a section with more ice creatures attacking. In retrospect, the fire one would have been cooler because I think the fire armor looked a lot neater and the effects were a lot more interesting looking, but pretty sure I chose the ice path. So that was it for this one. I think this was a really cool concept, and I really hope they bring back more effects like this going forward because I had a lot of fun with the way they set it all up. Next up was Stranger Things 4. This one starts off, you're walking outside of Eddie's trailer. You see in the window the like Chrissy wake up scene with projection showing what's going on. Then you walk into the trailer itself. It's like you're actually walking in there. Eddie's on one side yelling. You see like the body of Chrissy up on the ceiling all contorted and messed up on the other side. I mentioned this a bit with the Dueling Dragons and some of the other ones, but this house had a lot of what I always refer to as like cross action where like you're in a path and like the action is going on across you basically. Like people on one side, people on the other interacting for the scare. I always think this is a fun thing with Halloween Horror Nights houses, and this house just really did a lot of it that I loved. You then kind of go into this outside suburban area scene, walking through like the backside of houses, and like Vecna comes out from behind some clothes on a clothesline. I don't remember anything like that from the show at all, but I think this is maybe just a way to show Vecna early on. You then go into a forest scene, and you have the like grandfather clock, which I think was on like a coffin or whatever, so kind of showing that bit, which I guess was more of a flashback since we already started with the Chrissy stuff. We then see the lab that Eleven's at. We have everything of her like in the sensory deprivation chamber. We see human Vecna using his powers. Then we see another cross bit where like Eleven's using her powers against him. There's like a effect going on with lights again on his chest showing the power happening and all that. Then you see like a partly messed up, still mostly human Vecna pop out at you. You're then brought into the upside down version of that mansion where you see full on Vecna and then all the vines and everything going throughout the house. That kind of continues on. You get like some faint echoes of the running up that hill playing in the background as you kind of wander through. And they have the full-on Master of Puppets scene. There's like a stage with Dustin and Eddie on it. And you kind of walk around the perimeter of the stage. A nice long walk past it all to really take it all in. So it's the two of them like fighting, like they're fighting the demo bats. There's a projection behind them of the bats flying around. And of course some Metallica, which you gotta love at HHN. You walk into another room and there's like the Eddie actor with the demo bat puppet on him. So he's like, you know, acting like it's attacking him or whatever, and it's more of another ragdoll thing where it's flopping around while he's trying to like act or whatever. I believe there was also a thing where there was like a window and the bat like slams up against the window at you as a jump scare. Then you have a scene in the mansion in the real world, and you see like Max levitating, see different characters coming in and yelling across that. You get a scene of like a Vecna dummy up on the wall with all the tendrils and energy flowing into him or whatever. A bit more jump scares of Vecna in the Upside Down at the end. And then as you walk out the door, there was a full-on Demogorgon actor in a suit waiting kind of behind the door to scare you as a final scare, which I thought was kind of a nice touch. Next up was Bloodmoon Dark Offering. So this is set in like a colonial village, so you walk into this colonial farmhouse. So there's like these cultists in these robes with like a mask on with like eye holes cut out of it. It's very burlappy looking fabric to look really rustic. The first scene, you have some of them that are mannequins and some that are real, and like one's up high in the rafters, like talking to them about how a sacrifice needs to be made. The moon is risen, we must sacrifice kind of thing. And I guess the whole idea is that like they make these sacrifices on the blood moon to ensure their harvest. As you go through, you see both villagers attacking you with like kind of typical like farmhouse tools like pitchforks and axes and things like that. You also see people who have been killed by those same kind of devices. You see somebody like pitchfork tines stuck into their side and things like that. A lot of this is like walking in and out of various houses within the village. So like you're inside, then you walk out into another alleyway, then into another house kind of thing. So one part you walk into like a village square, which has a lot of really built up high stuff. And there's almost like it was a maypole or whatever, a little kid cultist mannequins around it. You walk into, I assume it's supposed to be like a bakery, and there's like a body half cooked coming out of the oven. Also, there were a lot of like fireplaces in all these houses, and they had really nice effects, like I think a light bit of smoke and then lighting to make it look like the fire was actually going. One really interesting sacrifice scene was like a body almost like tied up crucifixion style with like candles melted all over it like they were killed by the melting wax. There was another scene where like a body was like laid over a bar and somebody like stabbed a deer antler into it. Like not a deer head, but just like the broken off one side of the antlers and hit him with like an axe, I guess. Then you walk into a church, kind of like walking through the front of the church, walking down the aisle of it, and all these cultists with their back towards you in the pew. Some, of course, are real, some are mannequins. And then you see up on the board, like behind the pulpit, there's something of like a Wicker Man-esque thing drawn up there. You walk back outside to another like street area. There's actually like a high tower with somebody up there looking down at you, so it gave a really cool sense of scale to everything. And then you walk into another building and they have this full-on Wicker Man thing with like heads and body parts sticking out of it, along with I think a bunch of like corn and stuff. And it's like their final sacrifice of everything. And I couldn't see it in the videos I watched back, but I want to say you could see like the red moon up in the sky for like a large portion of the house, which was definitely a nice touch given the theme. Next up was Exorcist Believer. Seemed like a weird choice because the movie was not out yet at the point I went. I think the movie opened midway through October, so like 2/3 of Halloween Horror Nights was done before the movie was out. And honestly, I dislike this house so much, I still haven't watched the movie, even though it's been streaming for a while now. So you start off walking into this village that looks kind of run down and abandoned, and you kind of go into this almost voodoo-looking shack, which I don't think it's supposed to be like a voodoo country, so it probably isn't voodoo. But you see like a table with like a sigil on it. I think there's a doll that maybe moves on it, a bunch of candles and stuff around. Then you go into an area where you see signs for the 2 missing girls. You go into a forest scene where you see people looking for them. One of my least favorite types of jump scares, like you have like a mother and like a police officer jumping out at you to scare you, but all they're doing is like looking for the kids. So it's like not a scary thing, it's just a very cheap jump scare. Then you go into like a barn or a house, and then you get the first of a few jump scares where it's like a demon jumping out at you, which felt really weird for The Exorcist. I don't know if that's in the movie or not, but that was kind of an odd choice to me. You're in a hospital hallway. They use the effect where like the wall kind of goes transparent. You can see the girls behind it acting all possessed and crazy. Then you're in the hallway of a home. It's like the stairs going up. Obviously you go on the main level, but at the top of the stairs is like a projection of one of the girls acting all crazy too. You go into a bedroom that I assume is supposed to be one of the little girls' bedrooms. There's like a body like rising up under the covers on the bed, just like sitting up, not like full Exorcist rising up. And like one of the girls jumps out at you and scares you. Another random demon scare in there. Scenes of the other girl like jumping out of the closet in areas trying to scare you from different bedrooms. Then they had the scene that I think was in all the trailers and stuff where the 2 girls are like back to back. I think they repeated this a few different times. I think you see it kind of normal one time, and you go into another room and like one of them's floating up in the air, the other one's like an actor laughing or whatever, and they're trying to like do the power of Christ thing. Then you come in, like the chairs are empty, the girls are loose, the room is all bathed in red light, it looks like cracked and messed up, like it's like coming apart or whatever. Then it kind of ends with more like demon jump scares and also these kind of rotting rotting corpse looking thing jump scares, and then it brings you, I think, back to the voodoo house, and then it's over. So I got very little out of that. I really don't know how deep into the movie that goes, but that's what was there. Next up is YETI Campground Kills. This one, the first facade you see is like the outside of a ranger station in a state park. YETI's coming out of the woods attacking you right from the start. You go into the ranger station, there's like a mutilated ranger, I think he was missing an arm or something, and another YETI attack there. You go outside to like a campsite area with like tents. You see a body being like dragged into one of the tents. There's projections on one of the other ones showing a YETI attacking inside. You then go into like a bait shop that's been destroyed by the YETI. You see like the old man killed, I guess, one of the owners of the shop, and then like his wife or whatever, old like, you know, lady with like curlers in her hair and a cigarette or whatever, coming out attacking the YETI with a frying pan. So that's another like cross action bit. Then you kind of go outside the bait shop on the porch. Kind of you're walking on the porch side of it, and then you see out into the woods or whatever. It's really dark, but you see there's like trees and stuff. I assume this could just be the forest, but given Universal's track record, I'm going to guess that's a swamp, and we're dealing with a swamp YETI. As you kind of walk back through the hallways here, there's a returning scare from one of the previous YETI houses where the YETI's actually up above you swiping down, which is one that I absolutely love. I was hoping they would repeat it for this house, and I was not disappointed. You then go into like a toilet room. It's not really an outhouse. It's like a, think of it more like a Friday the 13th camp toilet area, but like no dividers between the stalls. And another YETI attacks in there. You walk into another house, it's like a 2-story house. The interior is destroyed, and like the second level is like collapsed down. Just a really cool thing that they built there. Again, these soundstage ones, you guys got this great sense of scale with them because they are so tall and big and everything. So this is a really impressive set that they made. And as you're walking out of there, you see a furry creature coming out and attacking you. And it's not a YETI this time, it's the HHN bear, which I know is a thing. I don't really know the history of it off the top of my head, but I know it's a thing. So that was kind of funny. You're then out at like a trailer campsite. There's like picnic tables and stuff, and you can see projected on the inside of the trailer like another person fighting with the YETI in there. And you kind of go through and there's like more YETI attacks throughout the woods before it ends. I don't remember where it was exactly, but I do remember there was a scene where like a woman had like killed a baby YETI and is all like proud or whatever, and then like a adult YETI's coming up behind her to kill her. But really enjoyable house. I love the scale of it. I love the design of all that stuff. I think they pulled that one off very well. So I think that was it for the houses themselves. So I had a couple things on my to-do list in terms of other stuff around the park, and one was the Last of Us food area. So the area that's normally called Sting Alley, it's like an alleyway that kind of goes between some of the buildings in the New York section of the park, was turned into this like Fedra ration station from The Last of Us. So at one end of the alleyway, there's like a booth kind of outside of it where you'd go and order your food, and then you go through and it was all themed out barbed wire and graffiti and posters and stuff throughout the alleyway. And there was a booth for drinks and a booth for food that were also themed. The food itself, depending on what you ordered, was also themed. A lot of the food was mushroom based, which is ironic with The Last of Us. And I specifically got the mushroom ravioli simply because it came in a cool Fedra ration can that I got to keep afterwards. So a little extra collectible to pick up. The ravioli itself was probably Chef Boyardee with a couple mushrooms thrown in. Not particularly good, but kind of a cool souvenir out of it. So at this point, I think I went kind of through some of the first two scare zones again, and then went back to the tribute store. I'd skipped the tribute store initially because I thought I was going to be out of time. I was cutting it close with time on a lot of this. And I was worried if I did the tribute store, I might miss out on a house, and I could also go back to the tribute store, I think, during the day. So I saved that to the end. The tribute store is at the normal location. The Jurassic Park one that they did was moved like to the Hollywood section of the park, but the HHM one was back in its normal location in New York. The outside was themed to a comic book shop, so like big display windows out front. They filled with a bunch of vintage Halloween stuff. There were comic books and things that they created, elements they created, like an HHM board game, but there were also either vintage or replica vintage things inside, like old magazines, old model kits, and masks, and things like that. It looked really cool. The little entryway when you first walk in kind of continues that comic shop theme where there's like a register, different display shelves, and racks of magazines and stuff. Some of the highlights in here for me was they had like old Universal Monsters Aurora kits, which I know recently got redone because I got one sitting right over there. There's like an Ultra Montaro figure, and then on the other side there was like a bunch of masks, including like a Don Post Tor Johnson mask. Then as you go in, each of the rooms are themed to like a different comic book. Like you're stepping into the panels. Very EC Comics, very creep show. They have like the host kind of character welcoming you in as like a cutout with like speech bubbles. So you walk into the rooms, and throughout the walls there are various like scenes from the comic playing out. So if you want to, you can kind of follow the story as you walk around the room. Of course, you know, the main purpose of it is to have merch and to sell merch. So that's the main part of the room, but the story kind of goes on around you. This first one was kind of like guys, I think, grave robbing or whatever, and there was some like larger than life skeleton monster, full size, like not 2D, actual 3D props in there that were supposed to be like the end of the story where they get like their comeuppance or whatever. Second room is kind of like a noir detective story kind of thing. It's all pretty much black and white except for the merchandise. There's like a rain projection effect going on. I believe this is themed. I don't remember the name of the character, but a couple years ago they had that like detective themed house in HHN. There's also a detective office in one of the backlot things. He's become a character associated with HHN. Like I said, don't remember his name, but it's based on his character. So it is more of a detective noir story. There's some kind of like idol thing that they're going after, which actually has like glowing red eyes, like one of the few bits of color in that display. And then as you go into the back of it, I think it like came to life or something. There's like a bigger version of it with like tentacles reaching out and bigger glowing red eyes. In this room, there was a Mold-A-Rama that was the Bride of Frankenstein. So I continue to collect these every time they come up, and this is a cool one. Kind of Statue of Liberty looking with that green color, but she came out pretty good. With the layout of this tribute store, after you go through the second room, there's kind of a hallway you have to walk down to get to the next part. This usually isn't heavily themed. They usually do some kind of thing in the last few years where you could like get your picture taken and put in there for a fee. And this time it was like comic covers, and you have your picture on the front of a comic. The next room was themed to like a 50s diner thing. So like these guys coming in to rob this diner, but the diner is run by the devil. So there's like jukeboxes and like old soda fountain style thing, tables with like a dead body, which I think was the old owner before the devil came in. And then you do see like the devil looming over one of the counters. This room also had a Mold-A-Rama, and that was of the Mummy. I like the sandstone kind of color for him. I like that they went more with the later incarnations of the Mummy from the old universe, like the later 40s movies or whatever, where he has the one arm bandaged up and all that. The last room was kind of the checkout room, but still had some merch, and it was Jack the Ripper themed. They also still had some like vintage Halloween decorations, so it was kind of like time inaccurate a little bit. It was like 50s and 60s stuff, but also like Victorian England stuff or whenever the hell Jack the Ripper was around. But it was a little lighter themed than the other ones, but still very cool looking, very moody. I did pick up, and I forgot to bring it in here with me, and I don't want to go dig it out, but I did pick up a comic based on the house. I have not even opened it to look at it, but yeah, they made a comic book based on what I assume is those 4 stories or whatever. I thought it was a cool collectible to pick up, and it was relatively inexpensive for an HHN item. And And then there's another hallway leading back out to the main area. And this starts kind of still comic themed and then transitions more into normal colors. You start seeing more of the posters and stuff for Vamp 69. So you're going back into that music festival mode. And there's like a newsstand with the kind of horror host character that was in the other rooms kind of brought into a 3D lifelike thing, selling magazines from behind this stand. Not actually selling anything as a static prop and a static booth, but giving that impression before you walk back out. I didn't spend much time in the Universal Studios store this time, but I did want to kind of mention that they had some really cool, like, fake stained glass windows on the outside showing various characters like Chucky and the Phantom and stuff. I thought that was a really neat touch. Inside of it, they had the Scarecrow stock kind of character. I assume that's what it was. I don't know whether it was scarecrows. The funny thing is, in past years, HHN has had a lot of Trick or Treat Studios masks all over the place. And a little bit before HHN this year, the news kind of broke that they had some legal disputes between Universal and Trick or Treat Studios. And I think it was over the rights to the Halloween 3 masks, because Trick or Treat Studios says they own them because they're Don Post masks. Universal says they own them because they're Halloween 3 masks. And that got ugly, and now they're not working together anymore. So where there would have been Tots masks, there were now a bunch of, I think they're like Forum Novelties or some other brand, but like just not particularly great Halloween masks sitting around. And then, as I was exiting the park, the area where the bathrooms are, but near security between the two parking garages, they put up the big stacks of jack-o'-lanterns that they had in that one vintage Halloween-style scare zone from last year. So it's kind of cool to see those again being used. As for my rankings, I'll start with the scare zones. So the lowest on my list, which is kind of normal, would be the first one when you walk in the park, Dr. Oddfellow's Collection of Horror. Every year this is just kind of a lackluster one. It's more just something to bring you into the event. I made a couple theming elements, but it really wasn't a whole lot of anything going on. Not particularly bad, but just not anything to write home about. Number 4 would be the next one I went into, Dark Zodiac. The theme here just really didn't do much for me, to be quite honest. It was definitely a lot better at night than it was during the day, but I kind of hurt myself on this one because I didn't get to spend as much time in it at night as I did during daylight hours. So I really didn't get to experience it the way it needed to be experienced, but overall I just think it was kind of a boring theme. Number 3 is Jungle of Doom. I really like the concept here, I like the theming. This one I actually liked more during the day when you could see more of those theming elements like the plane and the bats and everything. I think a lot of stuff got kind of hidden by darkness, which is cool in its own right, but there was a lot of cool stuff to see here. The thickness of that fog really did ruin things. Like I said, I'm not sure if that was something that was happening every night or if it was something specifically the night I went because of the humidity and all that. I'm not really sure what was going on with that, but it did make it hard to enjoy that zone as much as I would have liked to. Overall, it was decent. I just wish I could have seen more of it for a lot of different reasons. Number 2 is Shipyard 32. As I said before, this is always really a bottlenecked area for a scare zone, but I feel like they actually made it work a lot better than usual this year. The theme itself was a bit scattered, but I kind of liked the idea. It felt a little almost Cabin in the Woodsy, where it's like, oh, here's monsters from all different areas and backgrounds and things. We're bringing them all together to terrorize people. So, while it wasn't like super elaborate or anything, or super cohesive, I guess, that kind of had its own charm to it. And then number 1, Vamp 69. Really didn't think this was going to be my favorite scare zone, but I think it covered a nice stretch of area. It had a lot of different theming and props going throughout it. I think they had a lot of fun with the concept of bringing like the hippie vampires and stuff to life. And then, you know, it was a good excuse to play some cool music during the whole thing. As for my house rankings, number 10, Exorcist Believer. I was excited to see this movie. Then I went in the house, and I still have not seen the movie yet because I just felt nothing for the concept. It just didn't really feel like there was enough from the film to put in there to make a good haunted house. Though I will say, I didn't like when they did the original Exorcist. Or initially I was like, oh, I would have rather just put the old Exorcist back in there. But I don't even think they did that very well back when they had that, because it's just not a movie that lends itself to being a haunted house all that well. The Exorcist is not about jump scares. It's about dread and, you know, existential crises and stuff like that. Crises of faith. It's not a jump scare kind of movie, no matter how many times the Pazuzu head pops up on screen. It's just not a good candidate for a haunted house. And maybe the new movie's like that too, and I'm not giving it a fair chance. And I do intend to see it eventually. It just got knocked way down the priority list for me. Number 9 is Dr. Oddfellow's Twisted Origins. It's kind of funny because in my Hallow Scream Tampa video, I praised their carnival house for not being just tons and tons of clowns, having a good variety of stuff, and this house felt like 90% clowns. Aside from that, I really just didn't think there was anything anything super interesting going on in this house. I don't feel like I saw any clear origins of the character, or had anything really explained about the character. It's just, oh, here's a place where he was doing stuff. And like I said, I thought the Jungle of Doom was supposed to be his origin story of getting his powers. So how is this the origin story too? I'm just confused. And I do think having that Jack the Clown element to tie it more to the rest of the HHN lore would have really helped here, just to give people like me who are a bit more casual in the HHN specific lore versus like the movie stuff that I know really well, you know, just a better in on what was going on here. So I will say those two houses I really didn't care for, but everything from this point on I would consider good houses. So number 8 is The Darkest Deal. I love the concept being brought in here, the idea of selling your soul for music fame and all that stuff. I also think that's a really interesting legend. I think they use some really cool tricks to bring the story to life with the projections and the lighting effects and things like that. Really made it feel like there was stuff going on within this house and gave it a nice energy. I know I got a bad run of seeing it, so I think some of my appreciation for this one comes from going back and watching other people's videos of it and seeing what I missed, but I think overall it was actually a really solid house and a cool concept to bring to the event. Number 7 is The Last of Us. As I said before, I think the house was really well done. I just would have liked a more cohesive story element, blending the whole thing together. I know this is hard to do and kind of hypocritical to say because HHN really doesn't do that all that often, especially with movie properties. The Shining got all chopped up and rearranged. Halloween 4 got all chopped up and rearranged. Like, they've never really told a full cohesive story. It's more about capturing the atmosphere of the movie or the property or whatever. But I guess just because it is a video game based property, it felt a little more like just wandering around fighting random enemies versus having a through line to it, which I kind of expected when you have the two main protagonists of the game kind of showing up in various spots. Like I said, not bad. I just think a little more story would have really elevated this one. Number 6, Stranger Things 4. I think this was a pretty solid telling of the show. It actually did stick pretty close to the storyline as much as possible within the constraints that you have there. A few things like the Vecna in the alleyway kind of felt throwaway, and there were maybe a little too much of like going through the house in the upside down or whatever. But overall, I think it was good to have those atmospheric places and parts, and then to have more, you know, direct, here's a scene. Because it's not like it's really scary with a lot of those things. So I think it's nice to kind of be like, oh, here's creepy, and then like, oh, cool, it's like the explosion of action when something cool from the show pops up. Obviously, with the limitations of the house, it really focused more on like the Eddie storyline and, you know, everybody back in Hawkins. It didn't really have much of the 11 Lab stuff. It had a little bit of that. Also didn't really have like the road trip, the Surfer Boy Pizza stuff, but they did pick up Surfer Boy Pizza for a food booth, so at least that got a little bit of representation there. And as I mentioned before, there was a lot of like that cross action where you're walking between like people on different sides, you interacting as the scare actors or whatever. And while other houses did that, I felt there was a lot of it here, and I just really enjoy that, especially, like I said, in a property where it's not going to be as much like jump scare kind of stuff, where it is more of like a high energy action kind of thing, more so I would consider it. I think that really helps elevate those kind of houses. Number 5, Chucky, Ultimate Kill Count. Before writing these rankings, I honestly thought this would be way higher. Like, the night of, I felt like this was one of my favorite houses. And that's really more on how much I enjoyed other houses too, as opposed to anything really wrong with this house. But I will say watching the Hollywood version of this house kind of did lower it a little bit because it's like, oh, we could have had that kind of thing. I wish we had more full puppets like they did in Cali. I wish they would have done the kill count thing a little bit more, like brought it more into the whole thing and had like a running count going. I think they did that in the Hollywood version as well. So there's little bits they could have tweaked here to make it cooler, but I think overall it was really fun. And as a fan of the property, I had a blast going through this house. Yeah, to me, Universal, when I started going as like a little kid, their whole thing was ride the movies. And while they still have bits of that, like it's lost that aspect a little bit in recent years, I feel. And Halloween Horror Nights, when it is based off a property, an actual like thing, I love feeling like I get to experience that, kind of going back to that old slogan they had. So this really captured that for me. Number 4, Bloodmoon, Dark Offerings. The houses and the sound stages usually are just so damn cool because there is so much space for them to play around with. Not just, you know, side to side, but the vertical space they're able to take advantage of with houses like this, I love. Every time they're able to build these, like, feels like an entire damn town you're walking through. And it's not just, you know, a room to a room cutting scenes and stuff. You actually feel like you're moving through a real environment. And things are kind of happening as they would within that world. I absolutely love it. And I think the costumes they picked for the cult were spot on. They were great to be able to let them, blend in with mannequins so you couldn't tell what was a person and what was, a static prop. And they were just simple but creepy and effective. Number 3, Universal Monsters Unmasked. I'm a sucker for Universal Monsters, so if they do it right, I'm going to rank it high usually. If they do it wrong, I'm probably going to throw it really low. I think I have in the past, but it's not quite up to what I wanted. But this was a good one. I really like this. That opening room on its own, really cool. Just the idea of like walking under the bridge, into the catacombs, all that stuff. Very creepy, really setting the mood for what you're doing. And I like that you kind of travel through the space. You start underground and then you go into the opera house and out onto the streets and into the Notre Dame Cathedral. Like similar to Bloodmoon, you are kind of weaving through the streets of Paris, moving through these monstrous attacks. My biggest complaint is I really wish the hide design was better done overall, but in recording this, I kind of realized, like I said earlier, maybe some reasons why they would have changed that from what you see in a lot of the movies. So overall, I think it worked well. Number 2, Dueling Dragons. I absolutely adore the effects they used in this house this time. All the different lighting effects, the glowing chest plates, the magic flying out of people's hands. Something I've not really seen to that extent in a haunt before, and I think it just really, really elevated this one and made it cool. I love how they did a great tribute to the old ride, having you be able to choose your path. Bit of a bummer that I just didn't have time to go back again and try the other path and get to experience both sides of it, but thankfully it was a pretty short section of the thing. You kind of got a taste of it overall from the earlier part where it switches from fire to ice, so you're not missing tons as far as I can tell. I don't know if there's other old attractions that were not branded properties that I could see them bringing back this way. I mean, I guess maybe they just closed the Poseidon's Fury or whatever it was called. Like maybe that could show up in some year, but I don't think people remember that as fondly as Dueling Dragons. I would be interested to see if they continued that trend in some way, shape, or form. And my number 1, YETI Campground Kills. I don't know what it is, but Universal always knocks it out of the park with YETI stuff. I think I heard there was something like they couldn't call it Bigfoot because that's like copyright for the monster truck or something, and maybe there was a reason they didn't do Sasquatch or whatever. But I honestly think this all goes back to that whole, like, not only have they done YETI houses in the snow and stuff before, but they had that one where it's all supposed to be a bunch of B movies and they had Swamp YETI. And I really feel like they were like bringing in that Swamp YETI vibes here again. Again, I love the scale of the sets, the different locations, making you feel like you're going through a campsite, the different kind of stores, ranger stations, and camping grounds and all that stuff. I think they really pulled it off with this one, and yeah, whenever Universal wants to do YETIs for Halloween Horror Nights, it usually seems like it works out really well. So, I don't want one every year, but I think every few years it's really cool to revisit it and see what new they have to offer with it. So, in conclusion, I had fun, but I am starting to worry HHN is getting way too big for its own good here. Like I said, I showed up a little bit late without an express pass for my first house. I bought that express pass while in line for my first house because I saw what the line was looking like. This was the end of September. It was on a Wednesday. I had express for most of the night. I didn't do any rides. I didn't do any shows. And I was still in the park from a little bit after they opened to less than an hour before they closed, trying to get through everything that was there. It's really starting to feel like there aren't really any slow nights at Halloween Horror Nights anymore. And I'm starting to worry it may get to the point where multiple nights are just mandatory if you want to see everything. It's not that I mind going multiple days, it just gets expensive. However, complaints aside, I always love this event. I always have fun. Even the years where it is a bit of a harder go through of everything. And I'll be back there next year because it's tradition at this point. So I appreciate you sitting here listening to me talk about a Halloween event right before Christmas. I don't know, maybe I just start on Halloween 2024 in January, so maybe I'll get stuff out in time. But until then, later. I thought once I left Halloween Horror Nights I'd be out of the fog, but looks like the fog is following me home.